Hi guys, so I wanted today to make a video about some of my non-fiction recommendations, and I know that's a pretty hard category to define because it is so massively broad, but there are some certain genres within non-fiction that I particularly like, so I thought if you had similar sort of interest to me then you might like to hear some of my recommendations. I read largely popular science books, sociology books, books that are generally about how the human mind and human interaction works. I've also been trying to read a bit more history recently, so there will be one or two recommendations in that category as well. I'm going straight to the top and giving you my favourite non-fiction book first, which is Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, who won the Nobel Prize for his research into experimental psychology, particularly the field of human decision making. This book really stems from a lifetime of research into this topic, and it's an extremely comprehensive discussion of this field. I don't feel like I can do it much justice at all by describing it, but as basically as I can explain, he explains the concept of human decision making by using two systems. System one is our fast thinking mechanism, which is intuitive and it's based on emotion, whereas system two is more logical and considered, and this is our slow decision-making process. This in itself doesn't seem like much of a revelation, but the overarching theory behind this book is that humans put too much stock in their intuitive response, and we make a lot of errors in judgment by relying too closely on this type of thought. What I like about this book is that he's dealing with very complex psychological theories that for someone like me who's never studied psychology or any related field would be well beyond my understanding, but he breaks it down into its key components so that it is accessible for pretty much everyone. Why this book is a favourite for me is that he backs up all the points he makes with little thought experiments that you can do as you read it, which helps to really ground his theories in real life. There are parts of it that are quite complex that I did have to concentrate hard to fully understand, but generally I think it is very accessible, and it was massively impactful towards me. I feel like it really made me think differently, not just think about things differently, but actually use my brain processes more consciously. Another book that I found incredibly important to the way I viewed things was Steven Pinker's The Blank Slate. It investigates and ultimately refutes the tabula rasa idea of human free will, the concept that we are a blank slate that is influenced entirely by culture and society, and instead says that we are, at least in part, a product of our human nature and evolution. This is the kind of book that stirs up all sorts of scientific and moral debates that I don't feel nearly informed enough to take part in. So I wouldn't take everything that Pinker says as absolute gospel because it is still debated, but it is a way just to explore this idea and open your mind up to a different way of viewing free will. I think people like to think of themselves as a blank slate because that is quite an empowering notion. It makes you think that you have total free will, and the alternative can be quite dispiriting, but this book really isn't like that. It is not trying to say that you are totally a product of, of human nature and you do have free will. It's not trying to refute that argument, but it's just absolutely fascinating. The next one I want to recommend is The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell, which is really interesting, but maybe a little bit less complex than the previous two. It basically analyses the process behind things that suddenly shift in society, like the sudden explosion of popularity of something or sudden decreases in crime. It was published in the year 2000, so it doesn't make a great deal of reference to digital culture, and I think this would be a great book to revise and consider the impact of the internet, and especially in relation to meme culture. I think that'd be fascinating. To be honest, someone's probably already written that book, but that doesn't make this one any less interesting. Next is Quiet by Susan Cain, which explores the power and the importance of introverts, and it's really a discussion of the misconceptions around introversion, and many introverts desire to appear more extroverted because those traits are associated more with success and being taken seriously. It argues not just from a subjective viewpoint but with real scientific evidence that introverts are at least as effective as extroverts in all areas of life. And it was quite a heartening read as an introvert anyway, because it made me feel a bit less guilty for being who I am. It's a book that I imagine will be read by far more introverts than extroverts, but to be honest, it's probably extroverts that would benefit most from reading this, because I believe it's important for introverts and extroverts to work together to make sure everyone's voices are heard. She's written a similar book for a younger audience called Quiet Power, which I think has the potential to be even more impactful, because I think the misconceptions around introversion begin to manifest at a very early age, and we should be doing more to try and eradicate this. The next one is a bit different and moving more into the human history genre, and I want to recommend Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari, which is an incredibly ambitious book, as you can see from the subtitle, which is A Brief History of Humankind. It charts the evolution of human species right from prehistory up until the 21st century, and it tries to answer the most fundamental question of why are Homo sapiens the dominant species on Earth. His primary idea is that Homo sapiens are the only animal to have been able to develop imagination in a way that allows us to create stories like money, law, God, politics, that allow us to create large systems of communication between millions of people and work together in a way that no other animal can. There is so much to this book, and I possibly can't summarise all of it, but it is incredibly informative. It is worth noting that the author's subjective viewpoint does colour this novel, as he's clearly an atheist and a vegetarian, but at least when I was reading it, I don't think these issues impact the veracity of his overall arguments. It is a very readable and accessible book, and in some cases this does lead to generalisations or exaggerations, but again, overall I don't think this is trying to impact his argument overall, and I do think it still retains a lot of integrity. I'm currently reading the sequel to this book, Homo Deus, which is more speculative because it's trying to predict the future of humankind and warn against some of the developments that we may be trying to achieve. But it's equally as fascinating, so I would also recommend that, although I've not quite finished it yet. I'm just going to briefly recommend the last book, which I recently finished, which is SPQR by Mary Beard. This is an extremely thoroughly researched history of the Roman Empire, which details politics, social situations, hierarchies, money, basically every topic you can think of. It aims not to recount every last battle and emperor, but rather give a broader overview of what made the empire so successful, why it was able to expand so much, what life was like living in the empire, these much broader questions. I went into it with approximately zero knowledge of the Roman Empire, and it was quite complex to read, not because it assumed prior knowledge of the reader, but just because the subject matter is so vast, and it is trying to cover 1,000 years of history in about 500 pages. I read it over the course of a few months, just because I felt like I had to do it that way, but it was incredibly informative, and it also just left me in awe of Mary Beard's powers of research and just sheer volume of knowledge about the Roman Empire. When you think of it that way, I think non-fiction books are some of the best value for money, because to get that amount of research for under £10, isn't that just amazing? So those are all my recommendations for now. I hope you enjoyed this video, and let me know if you've read any of these ones. I'd really like to hear your thoughts, but I'll see you in my next video. Bye bye.